Fertility treatment is expensive, stressful, and time-consuming for patients, and recently it's become legally challenging too, at least in Alabama. Meanwhile, IVF specialists, like other medical providers, are looking for the flexibility, independence, and other potential benefits of technology and new business models. Enter the IVF Guide, offering embryology as a service and fertility nursing as a service to bring these new concepts to life. Hi, everyone. I'm David Williams, president of strategy consulting firm HealthBiz Group and host of the HealthBiz podcast, a weekly show where I interview top healthcare leaders about their lives and careers. If you like this show, please subscribe and leave a review. Julia, welcome to the HealthBiz podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Nice to meet you.
Yeah, awesome. All right. Well, we're going to talk about before birth, but we don't need to do that with you. But I'm interested in your childhood and any childhood influences that have stuck with you throughout your career.
Okay. Well, I grew up on the Isle of Wight, which is a small island off the south of England, on a dairy farm. So my father was a dairy farmer, and he had to leave school when he was 16 to work on the family farm, but he still remains to this day the cleverest person I'll ever meet or ever will meet. He's just brilliantly clever, but worked so hard on that farm through my whole childhood, and that really gave me and really focused on the power of education. He was constantly frustrated that he couldn't go to university. He could have done anything he wanted. He could have gone to med school, law school. He was very much focused on me, therefore, being a fairly bright child. Okay, you're going to go to med school. And I thought there was two options in my life. I thought there was Oxford or Cambridge, medicine or law. That was the only thing my dad told me about, right? But also, for some strange reason, I don't know why, I went to a school where they put half the kids up a year. So I went through my education, and because I was already extremely young, and I think I was very tall, and they put me up a year based on my height as well, I ended up going through school very early. So I did O-levels when I was 13. Most people do them when they're 16, and I did my A-levels at 16. And that meant that I didn't do brilliantly in school. I did okay. I did just good enough. And that meant I couldn't get into med school, which was a disappointment to my family at the time. But it was something that always sort of burned in my mind, med school, I wish I could have done it. The other really important influence on me was my mother. When she gave birth to me, she had an epidural, which was at the time in the 70s quite novel, and it caused paralysis. And so I grew up with a paralyzed mother, and very much hearing, that was because of the birth of me. So I kind of carried this thing with me around, perhaps a bit of guilt, or definitely some guilt, but also valuing your body and valuing what you can do with it while you've got it, while you've got your legs, while you've got your arms, while you can move your hands, while you can move about a house. I mean, not a day goes past where I don't value physical movement and being able to make the most of what you're doing, because she was a brilliant, wonderful person, but couldn't achieve anything. And it's very sad actually now looking at, the technology that's out there. I see people wearing bodysuits and walking marathons, or, all the voice recognition technology. She was just on the cusp of the internet, and she passed away in the 90s. Early 2000s. So I'm very much, I suppose, aware of those. They were powerful influences, both brilliantly clever person working really, really hard, and also someone very disabled and having to care for them and make the most of my life and value every opportunity I've been given, I guess.
Wow. So it's a powerful and heavy upbringing, we'll say. So, yeah, nicely done. All right. So you didn't go to med school, but you did study zoology and animal biology to start with, and then clinical embryology. So how did that all come to pass?
Yeah, well, I think I wanted to do psychology, and I didn't make the grades to do psychology, so fell into zoology degree through what they call clearing in the UK. It's just like, where's their spaces? Went to a pretty decent university, but I don't think I ever really connected with the course, to be honest. Didn't do brilliantly well at it, didn't know what I wanted to do, and ended up doing some conservation work when I was about 21 after leaving university in Tanzania. And when I came back, and that burnt me away from, I thought I wanted to work in conservation, realized that all the money went to the wrong hands. The money wasn't going where it needed to be, and we weren't actually conserving. We were doing damage on the project that I was on, I felt. So I came back to the UK thinking, well, what do I do next? And when I moved out of my house in London, another guy had moved into my room in this big shared house, and he was an embryologist. I live with a bunch of artists, and because they're all artists, they thought, well, science is science. This guy's an embryologist. You did science. You should talk to him. And I thought at the time, what a waste of time. I'm in conservation. I'll just be nice and talk to this guy. And it opened my eyes to like, wow, like if you're a scientist, you end up working either in teaching or research or a lab. But this was be a scientist that work with patients on something that is such a fundamental human need to have a child. And as soon as that first day I walked into an IVF lab when I got a job, it was the world opened up in front of me, and I think I fulfilled my potential because I was finally really good at something. I was so good at it because I was so interested. And like all things, if you really care and you're really interested, then you're great at it. And I just excelled in this career for whatever reason. I was in Manchester, and luckily an American girl came to work with us in Manchester called Amy Jones, who is still a lifelong friend of mine. And she had worked at some amazing clinics in the US and it got me a job in New York. So I was 24 and I'd done 2 years in IVF in the UK, and suddenly I had this job in New York. And working in America, you'll know this, well, maybe you don't know the comparison, but as a British person working in America, I was 24 and I was introduced as the English expert. At 24. Now in England, you are not the expert until you've been there 30 years. It doesn't matter what you've done, what you've published, what you've achieved. The hierarchy is very strong in the UK, especially with the NHS and the doctors. The doctors, hold it all. But in America, if you do something and you work hard, you just get that. You've earned it, and you are introduced as that expert. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm the expert. Well, I better behave like an expert. And it really did. It elevated my career 1,000-fold working in America. I then met my husband in America. And
all right, so before you get there, I want to hear what does a clinical embryologist do?
Yeah, sure. Well, so a clinical embryologist does everything from when the eggs come out the body to when the embryos go back in the body, in theory. So we're some people say it's like the first babysitters or whatever, but it's a little bit more than that. It's highly skilled hand-eye coordination. Everything seems kind of ironic when I explain it because I'm the clumsiest person you'll ever meet. But it's, because every single egg that comes out the body is so, so precious. You cannot lose it. You cannot put it in the wrong place. You obviously can't put the wrong sperm with it. So there is absolutely zero error. So it's a ridiculous pressure job. I've always found it a ridiculously pressured job. But I think because I was so I've always been such a kind of, loud, slightly clumsy person, I had to really, really switch my head in when I was working in such a focused way that I was actually quite good at it. But because I also work at 100 miles an hour, I was quite good at it because you have to work very, very quickly. Because obviously when something comes out of the incubator, the temperature is dropping or the pH is changing. So everything you do is very quick, but absolutely exact, and you can't mess up. If you lose an egg, well, then that's a potential for a pregnancy, or you lose an embryo. And there are many, many parts of the process where you can either damage an egg, damage an embryo, lose it. They go off on these little bubbles in little oil over the fluid. So there was a constant state of adrenaline to look after those eggs and embryos. But yeah, it's become much more automated now. So you have time-lapse incubators. They're putting in robots for most of these stages now, which is really exciting. And obviously that takes out so much of the of the kind of fluctuations in results that can happen with so many people involved. Yeah.
So you met your husband and then you took off for New Zealand.
So I took off for New Zealand. My sister lived in New Zealand, and I was in New York around 2001. So we had the Twin Towers and all of that, and and then we had anthrax. Then I got on a plane to go back to see my mother. And I don't know if you remember, but just after the Twin Towers disaster. A month later, when they opened up the airports, I was in, I don't know if it was JFK or Newark Airport, on one of the first planes to go out of New York. And the plane in front of us took off to the Dominican Republic, and it crashed into Brooklyn. And everybody on the plane died. And I was behind that plane. And then I got home to, so that was just horrific, absolutely horrific. We thought we were on this plane and people were just, blowing up the planes. And people don't remember that, of course, because it was in the wake of the Twin Towers. It was small. It was 300 people died or whatever in comparison to the 3,000. So, but it was horrific. And my poor mother was dying at home. And so then I finally did get back to England and she died the next day. So that whole period of Twin Towers, Dominican Republic, mother's death. And I was due to go back to New York and a job came up in New Zealand. And I just thought, that's it, I'm done. My American spell is now done. I've been there for 4 years and I just thought this isn't my fight to have anymore. I was just, it felt so living on the edge in New York at that time. And I think, like anybody there at the time, I think you'll always carry being there. That was, pretty powerful.
So how was New Zealand?
So New Zealand was amazing. And what's incredible about New Zealand is the people. They are so far. What I didn't realize until I went to New Zealand is it's a 5-hour flight from Australia to get to New Zealand, right? You think it's like tucked in there with Australia. It's not.
It's just next door. You think it's like going from, Boston to New York or something.
It's like from me to you right now. You're in Boston, right? I'm in Spain. Yeah. It's that far away, right? So we're in very different time zones right now. That's New Zealand to Australia. But what's incredible about New Zealand is they call it Kiwi ingenuity. They look at themselves as global players, and they are. They want to be up there with the best of them. So even though there was absolutely no competition in IVF there, they were the one clinic in the capital town of Wellington. They had no competition for hundreds of miles. I think there was only 3 clinics in the whole of New Zealand at the time, but they still wanted to be the best. They wanted to have the absolute best pregnancy rates. They wanted to know how. They loved that I was from New York and I'd come from the best clinics in New York, like RMA NJ is like one of the best clinics still in the world. And they embraced that. But when I was saying, okay, look, we need, this isn't, we've got no heated stage for our embryos. We're getting the embryos out of the incubator and they're sitting on, the temperature's dropping. And they were like, well, what do we need? And I'm like, well, you need a hood with a heated stage and it'll cost about $200,000 or whatever. And they're like, well, we don't have that. We haven't got those kind of exchange rates or currencies to, the income, the revenue to support that. So instead I get this guy that would come in with his, filthy kind of work carpenter bag and say, what is it you need? And he welded me a heated stage with a bit of blue tack here. And my God, the rates there were comparable to America. We were above a garage where there was like spray paint with the cars. And, so when people say, oh, IVF is only as good as your lab, that is very true to an extent. You've got to have a great lab, but it's also about your attention to detail and it's a bit like Formula One racing cars, IVF. There are so many different stages of it. There's, it's like if you've got the wheels and then the aerodynamic and then the driver and then the type of petrol. It is, like many areas of healthcare. But I think that what is unique about IVF and what patients tend to not know is that if you go for heart surgery or something, you kind of believe that you're going to have the same outcome, whether you go to that good hospital or that good hospital. In IVF, the disparity of pregnancy rates is enormous, depending on the country you have your IVF in, the clinic, the doctors, the lab, all of these different things. And they all have to be working as one to get to that absolute extremely good outcomes. And New Zealand was like that. It was really wonderful. The other thing I learned from New Zealand was I think it was kind of before the term politically correct was even kind of there, but they were very much aware of the different cultures, the Maori, the respect for the diverse community that they were catering for, but also for the staff. So every IVF clinic will have counsellors to support their patients. There, they were very much, the counsellors are supporting you too. If there's an issue, we'll mediate. It was very much, for me, very progressive at the time in the sort of early 2000s. Now it's very much the norm to work in those ways. But I learned a lot in New Zealand about just, being respectful and caring for each other in your employee group as well. And I certainly brought a lot of that back to my clinic when I have my own clinic.
Got it. And so Complete Fertility Limited, what was that?
So that was coming back to the UK. I mentioned that, I wasn't enamored with some of the hierarchy and the ways of working in the UK. We're very innovative in the UK, and we had the first test tube baby, and we, the science and the research is up there. However, the pregnancy rates have never been at the level of the Americans. And there's a bit of a feeling that, well, in the UK, well, maybe those Americans are lying, or maybe those Americans aren't doing literally. And I hate saying, but that's what I don't think this, because I've worked with the Americans, right? But there's a bit of a feeling of, well, if we are doing the best, so if they've got better numbers than us, well, they must be lying, because we're doing the best. There is nowhere here that we can improve. There's not, and I'm not saying this about every clinic, but certainly many clinics in the UK have this culture of like, oh, well, you've got 70% people pregnant in America. Well, okay, just have another beer. I would expect people to ask information like, well, what the hell are you doing to get those pregnancy rates? Yeah. How do you do it? Instead of just thinking, well, I don't believe you. And there's that, it's something about the culture, and I don't know, and I shouldn't say it, and not everyone is like that, of course. So, but because of that, when I came back to the UK, I thought, I don't want to work in IVF again. If I can't work in these amazing clinics, I don't want to work in it. So I dabbled with training as an osteopath for a while. I thought, I've used osteopaths in the past. I thought it's a good way to use. Again, that was when I tried to get back into med school, actually. I was like, right, this is my chance. I came back I was 30 years old when I came back to the UK, moving back with my husband, pre-kids. I thought, this is my chance. So I'll apply to med school. And I didn't get in again because they looked at my results from when I was 17, and it's like, oh my God, I still can't. Fine. Okay. So I did osteopathy for a couple of years until I had a couple of babies. But during that time, I realized I don't actually like touching people. So
yeah, good to know.
Yeah. So I was like, maybe this isn't going to work. So then I joined a group in the UK. It was an fertility clinic where they had a lot of sperm and embryos frozen, but then the fertility clinic in question had moved off site and left all the National Health Service frozen materials. And I was hired to basically close it down. But the doctor that was there could see the potential of what we were sitting on, because they were doing the diagnostics for the whole county under the National Health System there. And so she told me that she wanted an IVF center. So I was kind of hired under false pretenses, because I thought I was coming to build an IVF center, but actually the hospital wanted me to close it down. So we spent about 3 years writing business cases and trying to get investment. And it took 3 years, but we got investment from the National Health Service to partner with them, because it was a way of, in the UK, some people are eligible for national health IVF, and the rest have to pay privately. And if you just do one, your business model doesn't really work, because then it's like, well, if your birthday is you're 36 next week, well, now you can no longer be a patient. So it just doesn't work. You've got to find a way to marry it up. So we created a public-private partnership, and it was very, very complicated. It meant that we were, in commercial partnership with the National Health Service, which its modus operandi is not to make money, to always do good, but equally to not invest money as well, to do everything on a shoestring. So they literally wanted us to turn patients away through a lot of that. It was very challenging, but I learned a huge amount, and I learned a huge amount about the pressures facing the NHS. I learned everything there is to know about business, and again, this is where my American side came in, having my husband as an American, because every day I'd be like, oh my God, there is, it looks like I'm in charge of this. And he'd be like, well, of course, who else is going to do it? Whereas the English in me is like, well, obviously I can't do that. And I'm a woman and I'm not a doctor. And then, that American angle of, you just do it, just see what happens, just keep going. And I just kept forging through, but it was extremely challenging, but we became the largest provider of IVF on the south coast of the UK. Still not a huge clinic, but it was a medium-sized clinic across 4 counties. We had 70 staff. And then finally, after about 12 years, we realized there was an interest to sell it. And we shopped around in that process, and that was extremely painful, because at that point we realized, okay, we're selling our business. The NHS is also selling their business. And of course, When we started it, we didn't actually put things in place to protect a sale. So we didn't even have, you know, we had an agreement for referrals, but there was no agreement to say who owned what. And we had to, so there was a 3-way sale, and it was horrific. It was the most exciting, but the most difficult and challenging period of my work career, for sure, to sell that company. I've never worked so hard in my life, and I've always worked pretty damn hard, but my God, did I work hard through those 2-3 years. It felt like, it became like a prison sentence. And I've actually said that to anyone now that's ever selling their business, is the high of selling the business is when you get that first offer. When you see that number, that is when you go out. That's when you should go out and celebrate and get drunk, because from that point on, it's just downhill hell to get. It becomes like a prison sentence, like you're never going to get there, you know. So
that sounds rough. All right, so that didn't stop you from starting another business, though. So what's the IVF guide?
So the IVF guide, well, I spent a while after Complete Fertility, when we sold that, I spent a while working for Virtus Health out of Asia and Australia, setting up their consulting program, which was supporting hospitals to put in IVF centers, or to commercialize IVF centers, or to bring them under the fold. And I did a little bit of M&A with them, supporting acquisitions of IVF clinics. So that was an amazing experience to just kind of learn that angle of business, and also for me to be working globally, because up to that point, I'd been working in clinics, you know, going to a clinic every day. And so during that period while I was working for Virtus with Asia, I moved my family to Spain. So I now live in Mallorca, and I was working remotely, and everything was going very well. But the last few months, I thought, okay, I'm going to work for myself now. And I carried on, and I think that's when I reached out to you. I was doing business consulting, but I knew that there's this element of patients out there that they're lost. Okay. So when a patient needs IVF, they go to a doctor, but when they go to that doctor, they don't realize that they have now signed up to that doctor's clinic. Okay. So they pay money for that doctor. So they emotionally and financially invest in that doctor. The doctor will then give them a diagnosis and a plan for IVF, or however their treatment will be. And it will be with that doctor's clinic. And hopefully that works. But if it doesn't work, they come out after 2 or 3 cycles and go, well, what just happened? You know, I didn't realize there was all these other clinics. And when going back to what I said before about the variety of success rates and the variety of different offerings that clinics have. Some specialize in donor eggs, some specialize in genetics, some specialize in older ladies or same-sex couples, or some have more in the support angle, or not, or they're more expensive, or this and that. You know, very, very different options in these different clinics. And I know that as an embryologist, and all my friends that are embryologists, I constantly, every month, you'll have a friend of a friend contact you saying, look, I just don't know where to go. I've been through this clinic a couple of times and they're saying this to me, but I don't know whether, are they ripping me off? Is it right? Should I try something else? And when you spend time with these patients, they end up going somewhere where they most of the time will get pregnant, because you are focusing on them and you are being unbiased. You're not, and it's rare that I send them to my own clinic. I will send them to my own clinic for some things, but most of the time I don't. And I'm no longer working in that clinic, but I'm still a shareholder of that clinic. Now, so I thought, well, okay, I'll set up this sort of fertility coaching business. You know, it can't be that hard. I'm sure everyone will want me. That's what my naivety. Everyone will want my help, right? And I won't be doing it for just the UK, because I live in Spain. I've been working globally. I'll do it for the world. Oh my God, I'm going to be a millionaire in 6 months, you know, because everyone's going to want my support. Yeah. Little did I know that I have not gone on Instagram, because I'm not that generation of Instagram. So I go on Instagram to start, you know, oh God, how's this going to work? And there is literally hundreds of thousands of people on there calling themselves fertility coaches. They are fertility coaches, fair enough, because they've had IVF. So they are experts because they've had IVF, or they're experts because they've got PCOS or endometriosis, and that's all great, and they can support patients. But the problem is that when you're a patient looking for information, you are getting the information of one patient's IVF journey and what happened to that one patient and what worked for them. And it's so overwhelming on Instagram and these forums. It's like, you know, if you're not drinking green juice by 5 o'clock in the morning, standing on your head, doing astrology, yoga by the beach and putting hot stones on your belly, you're not going to get pregnant. And actually, you know, it's very, very overwhelming for patients to actually find the truth and the way and the simple path through it. So I thought, firstly, okay, well, I'm not going to be a fertility coach because everyone's doing that. I'm a fertility expert, and I think it's about time that even though I'm not a doctor. As embryologists, we're not really supposed to call ourselves the experts. It's the doctors that are experts, right? That's, how it is. But actually, if you look under the cover in any IVF clinic, the embryologists are pretty much running those IVF clinics. They are brilliantly clever. Not me, because I've been in it for 30 years and I got in different ways. But nowadays, most of the embryologists you meet have turned down medical school places to get into it. In the UK, we have 6 or 7 places a year to go through the training program because it's a government funded. So we will have literally 3,000 to 4,000 applicants for those 6 places. They are the cream of the cream intellectually. But then they get a job as an embryologist and they're put in a lab. And that's what they can do. Are you kidding? Like, they know that fertility pathway better. And I hate to say this to a doctor or put it out there, but I would argue, and most doctors would agree, they probably know the fertility pathway better than a doctor. Now, I appreciate we can't prescribe. We can't talk about disease. We can't, there is many things we can't do as a doctor. But when it comes to fertility patients, we can definitely get them through this pathway and use the doctor at the points that we need. So the idea behind the IVF guide, when I started reaching out and realizing that this wasn't just going to be about me, I'm going to start bringing, I'll talk to a couple of friends that I've worked with before. Everyone I spoke to is like, my God, how do I get on board? How do I get on board? And before I know it, I've got 80 people on this platform globally, and I'm aiming for 250 in the next 2 or 3 months. And I know if I spent the next week doing that, I'd have the 250 by next week. Every time I put something out there, people are clamoring to join this because there is no opportunity for an embryologist or a fertility nurse to work outside of a clinic at the moment. I mean, they could work by themselves as a fertility coach, like I mentioned, but that is hard, and they are one person. So if they've got a patient down the road or in another county or another state, how do they know those clinics? How can they support them? This way, through this network, this cobweb of IVF specialists across the globe, we are covering, my aim is to cover every clinic, every provider. So my blue sky thinking here is where I'm aiming for is that for anyone on an IVF journey or fertility journey, I hope that they will come to the IVF guide first. They'll see an embryologist or a fertility nurse first who will understand where they are on their journey. If they need a doctor, they can recommend one of the doctors that we've got on our platform, or they can recommend the many other doctors out there that are in that person's neighborhood or wherever they want to be. And they will do the research for them of how much that's going to cost. And we will also have discounts. So if you come to us, we will get discounts with every provider, every clinic. And we're already building those up now. We're getting really substantial discounts. So we will never get a kickback to the IVF guide. So most, a lot of these companies work because the clinic will pay you to refer, right? Every time a clinical provider is telling me that they'll give me a pipeline or a referral fee, I'm saying, no, I'd love to have that, but then we won't be independent. So we'll take that fee and that will be the discount for the patient. So the patient comes through, we can therefore get them all the way up to just the pre-egg collection stage in a clinic. And then they can have that pathway through the clinic and then come back out the other side and back to our platform. So that's the idea. And we've already got a number of clinics worldwide, maybe 20, signing up to be affiliated partners of this program for discounts and also for the treatment preparation phase. But then I'm thinking, hang on, I've got all these amazing embryologists and nurses joining the platform. They all want to work remotely. They've got no option to, at the moment, other than going into their clinic every day. What about the fact that these clinics, at least 25 to 40, 50% of what embryologists do is not in the lab. It is calling patients, it's doing KPIs, it's mining data, it's managing complaints. Like I said before, the embryologists are the powerhouses of these clinics. They write all the documentation. They know the operational pathways. They even do the marketing, right? And so I'm like, well, let's outsource that because you're paying those people to be in your clinic every day. But for a fraction of the rate for a subscription, you can have 2 hours of one of our completely top qualified embryologists just down the road working from home as if they're an extension of your team. And the idea is that we're always really collaborative with clinics. We're never going to say anything negative about a clinic. We will work as if we are part of your clinic. We'll access your data so that the data stays on your clinic platform. We won't own any or hold any data. And then the same for the nurses. So we're doing, the nurses is actually even more they can do remotely beyond giving injections or ultrasound scans or being in theatre, the operating theatre, the surgical room, whatever you call it in America.
We call it the theatre here too. No, we don't.
We do
really,
call it theatre or
yeah.
the OR.
Sometimes they call it that. No, it's usually the
American language. Yeah, so the nurses can do it too. And so that's our embryology as a service, nursing as a service model. And then I always realized also is that some of the consulting work I was doing before, like building IVF clinics in Asia, well, that work is still continuing. And so now instead of it just being me, I can put a team of specialists on it and take another project. And this way, these embryologists and nurses are getting really interesting, meaty projects. You know, embryology is brilliant and it's very satisfying for many years, and then it gets extremely repetitive. It's like, I've always said, it's a bit like, and it's probably a bit offensive, I don't know, but it's a bit like being a really top tier waitress. You do the same thing every day, but there is zero room for error. But you know, once you've learned everything and you know everything, it does get quite tedious. Some people love it and want to keep doing that forever, and that's brilliant. But there's another side of embryologists and nurses that love that patient side. They see the benefit of when a patient gets to meet you and they want to be a part of this program. So yeah, that's it in a nutshell.
Got it.
One more thing to add, though, I suppose, is that we're tying it all up as if we are a clinic with the clinical governance. So I'm giving these independent practitioners a platform to work independently by providing them with the sort of protocols, the clinical governance groups, the insurance, and everything you would expect if we were running a clinic, so that we are very safely practicing. And you know, we've got onboarding validation committees. We are bringing on some doctors so that we've got medical directors in each territory, so that we can ensure the compliance and regulatory, you know, upkeep in each territory.
Well, I look forward to seeing how this unfolds. It sounds like it's off to a terrific start. I want to say that, you know, I think any discussion right now about IVF, we have to acknowledge and try to understand a little bit what's happened in Alabama. You know, there was this court ruling that I think people weren't paying attention to, and then all of it came out, and it seemed to have some cataclysmic impact on IVF, at least initially in Alabama. How should we think about that case? And, you know, what's the impact?
Well, the impact is enormous, isn't it? I mean, it's extremely sad, because it's come from something that happened that was really serious, and, you know, was reasonable that it went to court, because and that perhaps that's being lost in the story a little bit. But these poor patients, actually, I think it's, from what I can understand, is 3 sets of patients lost their embryos in some incident in that clinic, which is highly strange that anyone, because apparently patients got into the cryo storage. And so, yes, so those 3 couples or individuals, I'm not sure which, lost their embryos. And that is devastating. And that was their potential children. But somehow the court has ruled that those were actual children, or have the same rights as actual children. And that, you know, everybody suddenly put the brakes on, like in a cartoon, like, what? Yeah, what did they just say? Because every IVF cycle, in most IVF cycles, there are embryos that have to go in the incinerator. You know, they are discarded as part of every single IVF cycle, because IVF is a numbers game. You know, we don't, since the 70s, we no longer take out one egg, inseminate it, and put that back. And even if we just did that one egg may develop incorrectly and not healthily. So we may have to discard even that one egg, you know. So we've got to a point where, to help people get pregnant, we take out more than one egg. And that's been around for 30 years, 40, 50 years, in fact, probably now, that where we are aiming for 10 to 15 eggs per cycle. We inseminate all of those eggs. We want as many embryos to develop as possible, so that we can monitor those embryos through the process and choose the ones most likely to achieve a pregnancy at the end of it. Any spare embryos, if they're good quality, they'll be frozen. But the majority of embryos won't be good enough quality, and they will be discarded very sensitively, but in the waste. And now, if we're saying that those are children, where are we? I mean, where are we? It's like, are we talking about Father Christmas? Because I mean, I don't know where to go with it. It's devastating. Yeah. It's devastating for all of those people in Alabama, and then probably in the states all around them. And I'm not in America, so I haven't got my finger on the pulse, but I can see, you know, what's happening, and the panic for everybody that's thinking, well, is this going to happen to us next? I mean, it's horrifying. And now I see that they've put in some kind of new ruling to say, oh, no, it's okay, you're safe. But they're not coming back on what they've defined the embryo as a child.
Right, because you can see what happened. There's a lot of blowback, because it's not really a political issue, IVF. It hasn't been. But so now they said you're protected if you damage an embryo, but that didn't say it wasn't a child. So, yeah, that's a problem.
It looks like a big mess. Yeah, it's really sad.
All right. Well, my last question for you, Julia, is if you've had a chance with all these things that you've been doing to read any books lately, anything that you might recommend for our listeners.
Yeah, I had to think about that. So I read constantly, and I have the memory of a gnat, so I usually forget what I've read the week before, but luckily you did pre-warn me about this. So I did think as the one book I always remember that had a huge impact on me was The Worst Journey in the World by Apsley Cherry Gerard. I don't know if you've heard of that.
Not yet, just now.
So Apsley Cherry Gerard was on the team with Scott who went to the South Pole in sort of around 1912, something like that. And he was put on the team to go to the Antarctic, but not to go to the pole. He was part of the scientific team to collect these emperor penguins' eggs that could only be collected in the middle of winter. So yeah, it's an insane story. I can go into it in more detail if you want, but we may not have.
We'll leave it for others to read. Well, excellent. Well, Julia Paget, IVF guide founder and CEO, thanks so much for joining me today on the HealthBiz podcast.
Thank you so much. It's been great.
You've been listening to the HealthBiz podcast with me, David Williams, president of Health Business Group. I conduct in-depth interviews with leaders in healthcare business and policy. If you like what you hear, go ahead and subscribe on your favorite service. While you're at it, go ahead and subscribe on your second and third favorite services as well. There's more good stuff to come, and you won't want to miss an episode. If your organization is seeking strategy consulting services in healthcare, check out our website, healthbusinessgroup.com.